IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm Amit Kumar, a research analyst with the Takshashila Institution's Indo-Pacific Studies program, and I'm joined by Anushka Saxena, my colleague from the program. Today we'll be delving into some of the developments that took place at the recently conducted special session of the 14th Chinese National People's Congress Standing Committee on July 25th. There was the rather infamous incident of Qin Gang's removal from the post of the Chinese foreign minister and the reappointment of Wang Yi to the post. Apart from it, Yi Gang was appointed as the new governor of the People's Bank of China, replacing Peng Gongsheng. And the 12th set of draft amendments to the Chinese criminal law were introduced. Welcome, Anushka. Happy to have you in this conversation.
Thanks, Amit. Happy to be here.
So let's begin by talking about a recent op-ed you wrote on Limelight on Nobody, which pertains to Qin Gang's removal. Firstly, can you discuss a little bit about what exactly a special session of the NPCSC is and how was it scheduled in this case?
Right. Thanks for that rather procedural backgrounder question to begin with, Amit. So the removal of Qin Gang and the reappointment of Wang Yi in the post of foreign minister took place at what we understood to be a special or emergency session convened by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, which is China's top legislature. And they did so by exercising the power vested in them under the rules of procedure of the NPCSC, more specifically Article 6 of that rules of procedure document. And the announcement for this session was also made abruptly. It was just a day prior to its commencement, when usually we have observed, this is no norm, but usually it's been observed that it takes at least 7 days for the announcement to run through before such a special session is convened. Now, what does Article 6 of the ROPs say? It reads that, and I'm quoting this directly from the rules of procedure, it says that sessions of the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress generally are to be held every 2 months, and additional sessions may be held when necessary. When there is a special need, sessions may be convened on an emergency basis. And it adds 2 subparagraphs where it says that the Council of Chairpersons of the NPCSC is to decide the dates on which the Standing Committee sessions are held, and the chairperson is to convene and preside over the Standing Committee sessions. Now, in the last NPC between 2018 and 2023, there were 5 such special sessions, I think, and these were convened for agenda items ranging from conferring honorary titles and other state honors across some 40 nominees to coincide with the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, to the adoption of legislations pertaining to, say, Hong Kong, foreign investment, domestic tax, so on and so forth. So to me, the convening of this special session means that there was this clear urgency to resume normalcy in foreign policy activity. Since in his absence, Qin Gang's scheduled foreign and diplomatic engagements from the past 1 month were being looked after by Wang Yi in his capacity as director of the Central Foreign Affairs Commission of the Communist Party of China. And some engagements were also postponed. For example, there was supposed to be a meeting between Qin Gang and the European Union foreign policy head Joseph Borrell in early July, and that was postponed. So yes, the convening of the session must also be seen in that light.
Right. In there, you make an argument about the powers of NPC Standing Committee vis-a-vis dismissal of personnel from state council positions, and how and what happened with Qing's foreign minister's position was different from that power. Can you explain some of this legality to our listeners?
Right. So, yes, I do refer to that in the opinion that you talked about. So this was not a typical dismissal of a high-ranking official. So There is another document that the NPC follows, which is the NPC Organic Law, or the founding fundamental law of how the NPC operates. And as per Article 32 of the Organic Law, the NPCSC has the power to dismiss officials as a punishment or a disciplinary action. So in Chinese, it's known as 撤期. From there, and this power is exercised to dismiss them from their state council posts, which is in accordance with recommendations put forth by the Council of Chairpersons of the NPC or the Premier of the State Council. The decision on Qin's removal, which is known as Mianchi, from the post of Foreign Affairs Minister at the NPCSC, was moved by neither the Council of the Chairpersons nor the Premier. And it also does not fall under the ambit of Article 32, because removal, as opposed to dismissal, is exercised in a situation where the tenure is nearing expiry or it's conducted as some routine process. For example, at the same emergency session, we saw, as you mentioned, that Pang Gongsheng was removed and Yi Gang was appointed, right? And this is obviously not the case with Qin Gang, because in the past also we've seen PBOC governors have retired between the ages of 60 and 70. And this was the case with Yi Gang as well. So the NPCSC in this case does have statutory authority under the NPC Organic Law, more specifically the amendments that were introduced to the law in 2021 to remove Qin Gang as state councillor, but they did not exercise that power during this session. So that was the odd part.
Okay, so maybe that's sign one, that not everything is hunky-dory with Qin Gang, that Qin Gang is unwell story, right? What are your thoughts on some of the speculations that are going around on this matter?
Right. So that's quite a treasure trove and a mine to dig. And what I personally observed is there are three dominant theoretical strains that have kind of emerged from these speculations. And I'll safely say that each one is either more likely or unlikely than the previous one, right? So one is that he was removed due to differences between his policy approach and that of Wang Yi's. And this one is often complemented with the theory that he rose to the position of foreign minister too fast, and he obviously attracted rivals and jealousy. Then the second one is that he was disciplined and purged due to his apparent extramarital affair with journalist Fu Xiaotian, who was working with Phoenix TV, and we haven't heard from her too since April this year. And the third is that he was genuinely terminally ill and he could not manage the foreign affairs portfolio well, which is why he needed to be removed. So now we cannot obviously know for sure if it was one or more of these factors which were individually responsible or compounded by coincidence, but each of these comes with its own caveats. Like, for example, it is possible that she faced a difficult choice following Wang Yi's line of foreign policy and that of his protege Qin, and he had to give in to the former. But in this case, it could be that as a consolation, Qin was allowed to retain his position as state councillor. But again, this doesn't explain why he couldn't be present at his removal ceremony, right? Moreover, given the nature of Qin's removal, like I mentioned before, as opposed to dismissal, as well as his retention of the state councillor position, it doesn't seem like his case is that of disciplinary action, even though, like I said, Fu herself has been out of the public eye since April, which is when she flew from the US to Beijing. Qin's removal and the controversy surrounding his relationship with Fu may have just coincidentally come together, or maybe the disciplinary action is pending. So the knee-jerk reaction was to remove him from the more important portfolio first and see what to do with the state councillor portfolio later. To me personally, it is also not possible entirely that the ill health reason is why Qin was removed, given the urgency of his removal and the fact that his mentions were entirely scrubbed off of the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, even though they remained on the State Council website. And of course, this could itself be explained by other factors, like maybe the CCP is so obsessed with control over information that they saw merit in removing any informational links to Qin to avoid any further engagement on the matter, or that his webpage simply crashed due to the surge in traffic, especially considering that now some of his mentions are returning to the MFA website. So without these caveats, a serious injury or a health issue, which was the very first reason the Chinese ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin also presented for Qin's absence at the ASEAN Regional Forum Foreign Ministers meeting, that could have explained his removal. And what do you think your thoughts are on this?
Yeah, before I give you my thoughts. What exactly is I know that you have brought out all the speculations regarding Qin Gang's removal, but which theory are you exactly going with?
Right. So I think, like I said, it's a mixture of many of these. I personally do not see a lot of merit in the theory that he's unwell. There are too many compounding, urgent, and mysterious factors here to for us to just believe that he was unwell. Because usually we see that, for example, if it was an illness like the coronavirus, he should have been back in public eye in 2 to 3 weeks, right? Or if he's so unwell that he cannot manage his governmental portfolio, then he should have been removed from the state council position as well. So what I can say is that I'm not entirely convinced with the ill health story. What I would rather put my position as being is that his position as state councillor was retained because Xi Jinping wanted him to have that position, even though he sided with Wang Yi's line of foreign policy. And the Fu incident just happened to coincide with the story with regards to Qin's position.
Okay, so even I'm not very convinced with the ill health theory, as our colleague Manoj has also written about it, and he largely believes that it's his ill health that has led to his dismissal from office. But what I suspect, of what the theory that I believe in, or rather what my theory is, that of course you've seen that Qin Gang was promoted very swiftly through the ranks, and he rose as China's foreign minister, which is very unusual in the Chinese setup, and especially with under the reign of Xi Jinping. So he was very quickly after he got the position of the ambassador to the US, he was promoted to the post of vice foreign minister, and then quickly he was promoted to the post of foreign minister, and then simultaneously he was also given the position of state councillor. So I think his very swift promotion to top level position might have created some friction within the existing staff of the Chinese cadre, which might have not seen this development in a very very in a good light. So there was some uneasiness among the Chinese cadre. Second, because when this thing about his whole affair with Fu Xiaotian came into light, I think it became very unsustainable for Xi to have him as his foreign minister, especially because he has been very tight on corruption, and his anti-corruption campaign has seen a lot of high-ranking officials lose their job, and it has led them to indulge in self-censure. So I think the combination of these both factors led to his demise and his fall from the position of foreign minister's office. That's my theory. Anyway.
Yeah, just to add one point to that, I think another thing that Manoj also always tells us is that it's very difficult to trace such friction or whatever contention to certain policy or policy makers in the Chinese ecosystem. Not to be confused with me propagating the idea that China is some kind of a black box. Definitely not. But in this particular kind of instance, the CCP also has this obsession to project itself as a very united party to both the domestic and the foreign audiences, which is why there is not only self-censure but also censure as a whole on whatever differences and divergences emerge within the party vis-a-vis the outside world, right? So even though, like you said, as there may be merit to the idea that there was contention to Qin Gang's rapid promotion and his coming into power as Minister of Foreign Affairs, we can never really know for sure what the evidence to suggest that is.
Right. This is obviously very engaging, indulging in speculation business, especially relating to Chinese domestic politics. But if we have learned anything from Chinese regulatory environment, it's best not to speculate beyond a certain degree, right? I would like to move on to another article of yours recently published, where you talk about how, amidst the controversy surrounding Qin Gang, the topic of the draft amendments to the Chinese criminal law kind of got lost in the voices, right? Can you tell us a little bit about what these amendments entail?
Right. So the Chinese criminal law, among other things, has provisions on financial discipline, corruption, bribery, as we were also talking about in Qin Gang case. We see that, if indeed it is a case of discipline, then the move to remove him from foreign minister obviously tells you how strictly the Chinese ecosystem kind of looks at this. So these 12th set of draft amendments proposed to the criminal law, and I believe they're open for public comments till 24th of August. They argue for the inclusion of the private sector enterprises which are operating in China under the ambit of the criminal law's anti-bribery and anti-corruption provisions. So previously these provisions were only applicable to state-owned enterprises and companies and public institutions, right? So the criminal law office of the NPCSC's Legislative Affairs Committee has proposed amendments to some 6 or 7 articles of the criminal law. I think 165 to 169 and 387 to 393. And all of these concern punishments for bribery and corruption. So under Articles 165, 66 and 69, for example, directors, managers or any other personnel who are engaged in private entities, they are to be included in the fold of punishments that were previously applicable to SOEs and public institutions. And the crimes, of course, are bribery and corruption. And here I might want to draw a distinction between bribery and corruption as per how the Chinese explain and understand it. So the sense I got from a reading of some of the documents is that bribery is the act of giving bribes and corruption is the act of taking bribes. And so in that context, the idea behind this move, this is something that the director of the said Legislative Affairs Committee also articulated recently. His name is Shen Chunyao. He said that it is to bring parity in the treatment of SOEs and private enterprises and to enforce this concept that he explained as two healths. So as we know, the Chinese are obsessed with a number and an alphabet soup, and these two healths indicate the healthy development of the non-public sector of the economy, which is the private sector, and the sound growth of the individuals engaged within this sector. And this concept, I believe, goes back to a speech Xi Jinping made in 2018 at a symposium on private enterprises. Similarly, the amendments that are proposed to Articles 390, 391 and 393, they pertain to making the sentencing heavier in serious cases of bribery. So this is an addition of provisions that the amendments provide. So they say what are serious cases of bribery, such as when bribes are given multiple times or to multiple people, when bribes are given in key projects or major programs, which I believe to mean public-private projects that are closely associated with the state's interests, when bribes are given in strategic fields such as law enforcement, justice, disaster relief, social security, and so on, and when bribes are given to facilitate some other type of criminal activity. So yeah, that's the overview of the amendments.
Great.
Stay tuned to All Things Policy. We'll be right back after a short commercial break.
But I just want to ask you, what are some other precedents to the provisions included in these arguments, if you would have any thoughts on it?
Yeah, so of course, just like the Indian ecosystem, and I think this was a point that was made in a great public policy book published by Vijay Kelkar and Ajay Shah, where they argue that if you want the government to listen to a proposal, they might not listen to it if it's mentioned once in one report, but they will definitely not listen to it if it isn't mentioned multiple times across multiple reports. So I think that applies to the Chinese context as well. And I think that also holds valid to the question you asked. So of course, there's some precedent to these amendments and provisions. They're not new largely. So first, I think in the middle of this, in the middle of last month only, on July 14th, I think, the Chinese Communist Party Central Committee and the State Council jointly issued a document called Opinions on Promoting Development and Growth of the Private Economy, in which they argued that there is a requirement to introduce judicial interpretations that increase the punishment for acts of corruption like embezzlement, buying positions, bribery, XYZ committed by private enterprises. And so the threefold aim that the opinions document said here is to deepen compliance reforms across private entities operating in China, strengthen the governance at the source in private enterprises, and guide them to establish strict auditing and financial accounting systems. So with these proposed amendments, the Criminal Law Office of the LAC has kind of attempted to put these opinions into action. And the criteria that I mentioned just a while ago about what constitutes serious cases of bribery, these are also, for example, taken from another document called Opinions on Further Advancing the Joint Investigation of Bribery and Bribe Taking. This was published 3 years ago in September 2021 by the CCDI, or the Central Commission for Disciplinary Inspection, which jointly with other law enforcement and disciplinary action arms said that, again, serious bribes are giving bribes multiple times to multiple people, and the other criteria that I mentioned. They also have another interesting criteria where they say that there should be increased sentencing for those also who did not restrain themselves in giving or taking bribes after the 18th Party Congress of the CCP in 2012. Of course, this criterion did not find mention in the draft amendments. So, of course, since she has ascended to power and at the 18th Party Congress and made anti-corruption a hallmark of his government, by now this is a fairly obvious criteria to take into account. So yeah, that's some of the discussion that has already happened in the Chinese policy-making ecosystem on these amendments.
I think the key takeaway for me was that if you have a policy suggestion to the government, you need to bring that up again and again, unless the government notices. Anyway, I'll have one final question for you. What kind of implications do you see these amendments, if promulgated, have for relevant stakeholders?
Right. So again, I think might be too early to judge, but from some of the examples or precedents we've seen in the past with regards to Chinese regulation on the private sector, if promulgated, the amended criminal law will provide a two-pronged impetus to Xi's campaigns. One is the ambitious anti-graft campaign, and the second is the otherwise increasing regulatory interventionism in the private sector. Of course, this is again not to say that private sector corruption or bribery should go unnoticed or is good in any way. I'm just saying this is an implication it will have. It may also be complemented by this idea of a blacklist system. So it's been in the works for a while. And this blacklist system for business people convicted of crimes of bribery or corruption was something that the CCDI announced in 2021. And what happens under the system is that those who will be listed on it will have restricted market access and restricted access to capital. It was implemented in the Hunan province back then, where I think more than 100 untrustworthy personnel were listed on a blacklist, and these numbers may see a surge across provinces with the force of the amended law behind them. And I think in the past, and these are some of my concluding thoughts on the criminal law, Xi Jinping and some of the other CCDI officials have argued that it is necessary to maintain what they call a clean relationship between governments and businesses. So they say that business persons shouldn't give bribes to governments, government officials shouldn't give bribes to business persons. And at the same time, government should listen to the concerns of private enterprises regarding protection of their rights and property. And the party committees that are attached to these businesses, they should explain how major policies work correctly. So these draft amendments to the criminal law kind of envision a relationship between these multiple aspects of the interaction between governments and businesses. And the aim, again, like I iterated above, is to create a level playing field for SOEs and private enterprises in terms of both the protections granted and the punishments meted out. So it has to again be put in the larger context of the equality in treatment of SOEs and private enterprises with regards to access to capital, with regards to the kind of control governments have. And of course, Western analysts are now arguing that no Chinese firm is really a private firm. So I think this just adds on to that narrative. And that's one big implication that I see coming out of it.
Yeah, so of late, the Chinese state has taken a slew of measures to ensure that they create level playing field for the private enterprises, to improve the environment or business sentiment for the private enterprises. But I still have my fingers crossed. I don't think these measures are going to improve the business sentiment that we have seen deteriorate in the past 2 or 3 years. So yeah, we'll have to see, wait and watch and see, and how this rolls out, right? But anyway, that was indeed an interesting discussion, Anushka. Looking forward to continued engagement on the subject of the NPC Standing Committee. sessions ahead, especially with the one coming up towards the end of this August. The dates will come out soon once the Council of NPCGM persons meet by mid-August. With that, thanks again, Anushka, and thank you to our listeners for tuning in into another episode of All Things Policy.
Thanks, Amit.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.